Have you ever wondered if the people you love are only with you for your money? Today's story is about a woman who decided to find out the truth. She traded her designer clothes for a thrift store dress to test her fiancé's wealthy family. They thought she was weak. They didn't know she held the key to their darkest secrets. Welcome back to Heirloom Scars. Let's unravel the truth.
The moment I stepped through that mahogany door, I knew I had either made the best decision of my life or the worst mistake imaginable. Patricia Whitmore's face contorted into an expression, hovering somewhere between a smile and disgust, like someone trying to pose for a photo while biting into a lemon. Her eyes swept over my plain navy dress, my modest flats, and my cheap drugstore earrings. I watched her calculate my net worth in her head and find me wanting. She leaned in toward her son, my fiancé, Marcus, and whispered something she thought was out of earshot, but I caught every word. "She looks like the help coming in through the wrong entrance." That was the moment I knew this dinner was going to be very, very interesting.
My name is Ella Graham. I'm 32 years old, and I have a confession to make. For the past 14 months, I've been keeping a secret from the man I'm supposed to marry. It's not a little secret, like eating the last slice of pizza and blaming it on the dog. And it's not a medium-sized secret, like the fact that I still sleep with a childhood stuffed animal. No, my secret is this. I take home $37,000 a month. That figure is even wilder before taxes. It's the kind of number, even after deductions, that makes accountants do a double take and ask if there's been a glitch. I'm a senior software architect at one of the biggest tech giants in the Pacific Northwest. I've been coding since I was 15, sold my first app at 22, and have been climbing the corporate ladder ever since. I hold 3 patents. I've spoken at international conferences. I have stock options that would make your eyes water. And Marcus? He thought I was an administrative assistant struggling to make rent. I never actually lied to him. When we met at a coffee shop 14 months ago, he asked what I did, and I told him I worked in tech. He nodded knowingly, then asked if I managed schedules for the executives. I smiled and murmured something vague about supporting the team. He filled in the blanks himself, and I simply never corrected him. Why would I do such a thing?
Why let the man I was dating, the man I was falling in love with, believe I was struggling financially when I could buy his car 10 times over without blinking? Because a long time ago, I learned a lesson from the most important person in my life. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed away when I was 7. She lived in a modest house, in a quiet neighborhood, drove a beat-up car, shopped at regular grocery stores, and never wore anything flashy. She taught me how to cook simple meals, how to cherish small pleasures, and to never measure my self-worth by the number in my bank account. What I didn't know until she passed away when I was 24 was this. My grandmother was sitting on a multi-million-dollar fortune. She had built a small business empire in her youth, made shrewd investments, and chose to live simply because she believed character mattered more than appearances. She left everything to me, along with a letter I still keep in my nightstand. In that letter, she wrote something I've never forgotten.
A person's true character is revealed only when they think no one, or at least no one they consider important, is watching. When they believe you have nothing to offer them. When they deem you beneath their notice. That is when you see who they truly are. So, when Marcus invited me to dinner at his family's estate, hinted that things were getting serious, and mentioned that his mother was a stickler for first impressions, I made a choice.
I was going to put the Whitmore family to my grandmother's test. I would show up as the simple, unpretentious woman they expected. I'd wear modest clothes, drive my old car, and speak humbly about my circumstances. And I would watch how they treated someone they considered beneath them, someone they believed had absolutely nothing to offer. Before you judge me, before you label me manipulative or deceptive, let me ask you this. Have you ever truly wondered what your partner's family thinks of you? Have you ever had that gnawing suspicion that the smiles were fake, the compliments hollow? Have you ever wanted to know the truth, even if it might hurt? I did. Because I wasn't just planning to marry Marcus. I was planning to marry into his family. And family, as my grandmother taught me, is forever. The Whitmore estate was exactly what I expected, yet it still managed to shock me with its sheer excess. The driveway alone was longer than some streets I've lived on. The gates were wrought iron, detailed with gold, as if regular iron simply wasn't ostentatious enough. The lawn was manicured with such precision, it looked like someone had measured every single blade of grass with a ruler. As I drove my 12-year-old Subaru Outback up that pristine driveway, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and my grandmother's tiny gold studs as my only jewelry. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong there. Perfect. Marcus met me at the door with a kiss that felt slightly performative, as if he were playing to an audience. His eyes flickered over my dress, my shoes, my lack of accessories, and I saw something in his expression I'd never noticed before. Embarrassment. He was ashamed of how I looked. I filed that observation away to unpack later. Inside, the house was a monument to new money, desperately trying to pass as old money. Crystal chandeliers dangled from every ceiling. The walls were adorned with oil paintings in gilded frames, though I spotted quickly that they were high-quality prints, not originals. The furniture was expensive, but looked stiff and uncomfortable, chosen clearly for aesthetics rather than livability. And there, standing in the foyer like a queen surveying her kingdom, was Patricia Whitmore. She was in her early 60s, and her face had clearly been acquainted with some excellent surgeons. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a perfect helmet that likely required industrial-strength hairspray to maintain. Her dress was designer, her jewels were real, and her smile was absolutely, entirely fake. She extended a hand to me, as if granting me an audience. I shook it, feeling that limpness, that dismissal, that complete absence of warmth. Then she made that comment to Marcus, the one about me looking like the maid. I just smiled and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. The evening was about to get very interesting. If I had known what I was walking into that night, I would have traded the navy dress for a suit of steel armor. But then again, I've always believed that information is the best armor, and I had done my homework.
The Whitmore family owned a chain of car dealerships spanning 3 states. Not the cool luxury brands you see in movies, but respectable, mid-range vehicles catering to everyday families. Marcus's father, Harold, had inherited the business from his own father and spent the last 30 years expanding it. Patricia, on the other hand, had married into the family at 23 and began climbing the social ladder with the determination of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. And then there was Vivian, the older sister.
Vivian, who treated the family fortune like her personal piggy bank. I'd gleaned all of this from public records and a few well-placed Google searches. But nothing prepared me for meeting Vivian in the flesh. Vivian arrived 20 minutes late, a move I'd later learn was her signature. Making an entrance was far more important to her than respecting other people's time. She floated into the living room in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. With diamonds dripping from her ears and neck, she looked like she'd tripped and fallen through a jewelry store display case. Her greeting was a single word, delivered with the warmth of a frozen fish. "Hello." No "nice to meet you." No "Marcus has told me so much about you." Just a "hello," accompanied by a slight curl of her lip, as if she smelled something foul. I smiled and said hello back. She immediately turned to her mother, launching into a conversation that deliberately excluded me, debating whether the florist had been fired over last month's fiasco. I stood there, clutching my glass of water, feeling about his welcome as a vegetarian in a steakhouse. Marcus hovered nearby, looking uncomfortable, but saying absolutely nothing. That was the second observation I filed away. His father, Harold Whitmore, was a different creature entirely. A large man who had likely been athletic in his youth, but had since surrendered to the comforts of wealth. He shook my hand in a way that was meant to be impressive, but just felt tired. However, his eyes were shrewd, and I caught him watching me with an expression that might have been curiosity. There was another guest I hadn't expected, Richard Hartley, an elderly gentleman introduced as an old family friend and business partner. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. When he shook my hand, his gaze lingered on my face, and a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes that surprised me. Did I know him? Had we met before? I couldn't place it, but throughout the evening I would catch him looking at me with that same puzzle-solving expression. Patricia led us into the dining room. It looked like it had been decorated by someone with an unlimited budget, but zero taste. The table was long enough to host a royal banquet. The chairs were upholstered in what I assumed was real silk. Patricia noticed me eyeing the silverware. "I suppose you aren't used to formal dining," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "My grandmother always taught me," I replied, "that it's not the forks that matter, but the people you share the meal with." Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Vivian made a scoffing sound into her wineglass, and dinner began. The first course was a soup I couldn't identify, served in bowls that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Patricia used this time to commence what I would later refer to as the interrogation. She asked where I grew up. "A small town in Oregon," I said. "True." She asked about my family. "My grandmother raised me," I said. "Also true."
She asked what my parents did. They passed away when I was young, I replied. Patricia made a sound meant to be sympathetic, but which sounded more like a drain unblocking, remarking on how difficult it is to grow up without proper guidance. My grandmother provided all the guidance I needed, I said. Vivian leaned forward, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. What did your grandmother do for a living? She was a businesswoman, I said. Vivian's eyebrows raised slightly. What kind of business? Small ventures, I said. Nothing too exciting. The truth was, my grandmother had founded a company she eventually sold for millions, but that wasn't the kind of truth that would serve me tonight. Patricia moved on. She asked about my current job. I'm in tech, I said. A secretary? She asked. More of a support role, I replied. Patricia nodded knowingly, as if I had just confirmed her verdict. Every team needs support staff, she said. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but, again, said nothing. And that was when Vivian decided to drop the Alexandra bomb. Alexandra. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone in still water, sending ripples across the table. Vivian said it so casually, as if discussing the weather or the quality of the soup. She mentioned running into Alexandra last week, how wonderful she looked, and how well her family's business was doing. I watched Marcus's face carefully. The walls were adorned with oil paintings in gilded frames, though I spotted quickly that they were high-quality prints, not originals. The furniture was expensive, but looked stiff and uncomfortable, chosen clearly for aesthetics rather than livability. And there, standing in the foyer like a queen surveying her kingdom, was Patricia Whitmore. She was in her early 60s, and her face had clearly been acquainted with some excellent surgeons. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a perfect helmet that likely required industrial-strength hairspray to maintain. Her dress was designer, her jewels were real, and her smile was absolutely, entirely fake. She extended a hand to me, as if granting me an audience. I turned slightly and saw at least 4 pictures featuring a beautiful brunette woman standing next to Marcus, arm in arm, smiling radiantly. Alexandra. Patricia followed my gaze and said nothing, but her satisfaction was almost palpable. Vivian twisted the knife a little deeper. She mentioned that Alexandra was still single. It's surprising no one has snapped her up yet, almost as if she's waiting for something, or someone. I turned back to the table and smiled. She sounds like an extraordinary woman, I said. That was definitely not the reaction Vivian expected. It threw her off balance. Patricia recovered quickly. Yes, Alexandra was extraordinary. Then, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, she added, I do hope you don't feel too out of place in our world, given your modest background. What do you mean by modest? I asked. Patricia's smile showed teeth. She explained that she understood not everyone was born with certain advantages, that some people had to work common jobs and live common lives, and that there was no shame in being common. Common. She had just called me common. I felt something shift inside me, but I kept my expression neutral. I came here to learn the truth about these people, and the truth was becoming very clear. Marcus finally spoke up. Mom didn't mean it like that. She's just trying to protect me. Patricia placed her hand over his. Of course I'm protective. A mother always wants the best for her son. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air like smoke. And you are not the best. Harold cleared his throat, attempting to pivot.
He asked about my hobbies. Reading, hiking, simple cooking, I said. Nothing fancy. Vivian laughed. How cute, like a child listing their favorite activities. Richard, the family friend, spoke for the first time since we sat down. Patricia shot him a look sour enough to curdle milk. Richard ignored her, continuing to look at me with that strange, probing expression. "What was your grandmother's name?" he asked. "Margaret Graham," I replied. Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing more, just nodded thoughtfully and returned to his soup. The rest of the dinner continued in the same vein. Patricia and Vivian asked questions designed to remind me of my place, which, according to them, was far beneath them. Marcus made feeble attempts to defend me, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. By the time dessert arrived, I knew everything I needed to know about the Whitmore family. They were world-class snobs who measured human worth in dollars and social connections. They saw me as a mistake, an obstacle to be removed. But I'd learned something else, too. Marcus wasn't the man I thought he was. This Marcus, sitting at his mother's table and letting them tear me apart without a single word of genuine protest, was weak. Someone who cared more about his family's approval than defending the woman he claimed to love. I wondered which Marcus was the real one, and I was about to find out. After dessert, Patricia announced we'd be having coffee in the living room. As the men headed to the window to talk business, Vivian asked to be excused to make a phone call. Patricia said she needed to speak with the maid. That left me alone with my thoughts, and a perfect opportunity. I excused myself to use the restroom. Walking down the long hallway, I passed a partially ajar door and heard voices. Patricia and Vivian. I stopped. Every instinct told me to keep walking, but the sharp urgency in Patricia's tone made me freeze. Staying in the shadows, I crept closer to the door, and what I heard made my blood run cold. The operation began the very next morning. My career had taught me the power of data, and the Whitmore's data was a catastrophe. Their company was sinking, with debt up to their eyeballs. But the real bombshell was this. Vivian was embezzling from the family business. She had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund her own luxury lifestyle. Thanks to my grandmother's old connections, I forged an alliance with Richard Hartley. Richard had a score to settle with them, too. They had swindled him years ago. When he saw the documents I held, he simply said, "I'm ready." I needed one last piece of evidence for the final blow. I followed Marcus. On the evening he claimed to be meeting a client, I caught him in a corner booth of a restaurant with Alexandra, holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes. I took photos. That night, I gave him one last chance, an opportunity to be honest. "Is there anything you're hiding?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "No, you are my everything." That was the moment the decision became final. There would be no mercy. The night of the engagement party. When the day of the party arrived, I tossed that modest navy dress in the trash. In its place, I wore an emerald green gown by a world-renowned designer, worth a small fortune. Around my neck hung my grandmother's priceless diamond necklace. On my wrist, a watch owned by only 50 people in the world. When I walked into the mansion, whispers rippled through the room in waves. The ordinary girl stepping out of the Subaru was gone. A queen had taken her place. When Patricia saw me, her face went white as a sheet. "These clothes, where?" she stammered. I just smiled. The stage was set. Harold and Patricia took the stage to embellish the lie about the big merger that would save the company. They called me up to join them, expecting me to play the role of the meek, grateful bride. I stepped up. I took the microphone. The silence was razor sharp. "I want to thank this family," I began, "for showing me their true faces." Patricia's smile froze. "When I came here, I made a decision," I told the crowd. "I wanted to test you. I wanted to see how you would treat someone you thought was poor, someone you thought could be of no use to you." Then I dropped the bombs, one after another. "You took me for the help. You mocked me as common behind my back. You used me as a pawn, a placeholder." I pulled out my phone and cast the photo of Marcus and Alexandra onto the giant screen. "While your son was proposing to me, he was actually cutting a deal with Alexandra to save your company." Gasps erupted from the hall. "Marcus tried to grab my arm. 'I can explain,' he cried. 'Too late,' I said, but I wasn't done. 'And as for the business side of things,' I said." Richard stepped out from the crowd, files in hand, and walked straight toward the representative of the auto manufacturer. "Whitmore Dealerships is insolvent," I announced. "And worse, Vivian Whitmore has been embezzling from the company for years." Vivian screamed lies, but Richard had already handed the documents to the authorities. I played my final move. I slid that cloudy, low-quality ring off my finger. I am Ella Graham. I possess a career and a fortune you cannot even imagine. But most importantly, I possess something you will never have: honor. I dropped the ring into Marcus's palm. "Give this to Alexandra. You deserve each other." I dropped the microphone and in that deathly silence walked off the stage with my head held high. I left behind chaos, screams, and a crumbling empire. The aftermath. 1 week later, the headlines hit. Whitmore Automotive files for bankruptcy following fraud investigation and license revocation. Vivian was under indictment. Marcus and his family were outcasts, exiled from the very high society they adored. And me? That morning I sat in my own home, sipping coffee in front of the view I loved so much. I saw a text from Marcus pop up. "Can we talk?" Without hesitation, I deleted it. My grandmother was right. Character is who you are when no one is watching. They failed the test. I, however, continued to write my own story on my own terms. Ella's story has shown us once again that sometimes the greatest strength lies in waiting silently, and the sharpest blade is the truth. From the Heirloom Scars family, thank you for staying with us to the very end of this journey of justice, and for being a part of our story. If you found a piece of yourself in this tale, or if you simply enjoyed watching justice be served, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to join our community. Your comments mean the world to me, so please share your thoughts down below.
Remember, every scar has a story to tell, and sometimes real life is far more shocking than fiction. I'll see you in the next video for stories that are even more striking, real, and profound.
Stay tuned and take care.